call this morning, we were talking about the concept of an occupational citizen. You were looking at some of the work happening in New Zealand.
Okay. Yeah, I was taking thought over to New Zealand, which is why I'm here, because they paid the airfare. Serious issue. Serious issue. I think had some hit researchers as well in New Zealand. In New Zealand, there's a body called Ako Aotearoa, whose main function is to improve the pedagogy, curriculum, and teachers' capabilities of teachers in tertiary education. There's a major concern in New Zealand around priority group learners. New Zealand has got the same problem as England. Narrow vocation qualifications that don't see children, the kids drop out of, even if they complete them, they don't seem to have any value in the labour market. Big problem. What the New Zealanders are now talking about, and I have to say I was really quite surprised by this because it's startlingly radical, is that for the priority learner groups in the future, the aim is to possibly move away from all the VQs to simply 5 occupational pathways, which will exist in education, but will then, if you like, branch out once you get into one of the 5 occupational families. They'll be both lateral and vertical pathways. And that in future, the courses that those young people can go on will be targeted at 5 occupational families rather than 120 different occupation specific VQs or job specific VQs. They really expect to do that, and it's interesting that one of the bodies that's pushing this hard is the Industrial Training Federation, which is the body that oversees the sectoral funding, sectoral training bodies. They're very keen on it. The Ministry of Education is getting keen on it, and I would strongly advise you to watch that particular space. I'm certainly going to, because I think it's quite an intriguing notion. And it would move New Zealand closer to what tends to be the norm in Northern Europe. In Northern Europe, there is a very different conception of what occupation is, and a much broader model of what you're going to train young people for in their initial education and training. What you do subsequently in further and adult education and training is different. But the belief is that you must give young people on the educational route a broad foundation that includes a substantial element of general education, which means they can then return to education later in life if that's what they want. But it also provides them with their ability to be responsible and well-educated citizens, because in that strange North European way, there is a belief that people are you're not just training workers, you're actually training your future citizens. But whereas you give people on the academic route in the Anglo-Saxon world broader education, you don't bother for those who are not on the academic route. That's not so in Northern Europe. They are expected, one of the elements, the T element in the T-shaped qualification, is around giving people the skills and knowledge to engage as lifelong learners and to be responsible and informed citizens who have a vote and have a right to take part in public affairs and public discourse. And therefore, it's a substantially broader set of learning people on the educational route. There's also the expectation that you're training people to progress, not just to do the immediate job. So if you learn to be a heavy goods vehicle lorry driver in England, you basically get a heavy goods vehicle driving license. A bit of health and safety, and that's it. If you do it in Germany, you'll do a foreign language, you'll do vehicle maintenance, you'll do logistics management, you'll also learn to drive the lorry, you'll probably do some science, maths and German, and the expectation is that you are being trained to set up your own trucking company. It's part of the package. It's this sort of going back to the original model of apprenticeship, where you were training future craft workers who will become their own master and set up their own shop. And that actually pervades practically their entire apprenticeship system. The idea that you are not just training people to be shop assistants, but actually people who could set up and run their own, or manage their own shop, or manage someone else's shop. So progression is built into the basic package. And I find that a really interesting model, and it's very different from what we do in England. And I think it's a model that has some significant strengths. In a labour market where young people are likely to move around or change jobs, be more natural. And also in a world where I like to believe that people can or ought to be able to at least progress to some extent. If we simply provide them with vocational qualifications that allow them to do entry-level jobs and nothing else, that actually makes progression way harder.
Has there been any studies on the results of that model, and has it shown to be a much better model?
Yes, well, certainly, it's certainly better for people in it. I mean, there's no doubt that in terms of the experience that the young people have, the degree to which they're subsequently able to return to learn. I mean, if you look at the OECD league tables on lifelong learning, on adult training, on a range of other sort of education training performance indicators, it's quite plain that those countries that have that kind of model tend to do better in terms of lifelong learning, participation, and adult learning. It's also the case, but of course it's always difficult to work out which way the causality runs. Those tend to be the countries that have higher levels of productivity and higher levels of wages for workers at all levels. It may be that it's simply that because they're more productive, they can afford the luxury of this kind of broad-based approach. But I would argue the opposite. I think the broad-based approach is part of what allows them to be more innovative. Because they've got a workforce that isn't simply, well, all I can do is this job. It actually builds in capacities. But then you need employers who are willing and able to exploit that ability to work more broadly.
We have a huge opportunity here in the social services area, and yet it's putting huge stress, I think, on large sections of the workforce. So we've got a mega human services department that is currently still operating in streams, but has the opportunity for people to move across streams because they're now part of the one government department. Similarly, that government department is funding an NGO sector where, while some organisations have been more aligned to one particular stream of a client or whatever, in the future, and even now, a number of NGOs are serving right across the spectrum and serving both federal and state government departments and various arms of government in terms of the different sorts of human services that they provide. So that broad brush scenario allows a lot of opportunity for flexibility, movement, etc., if we can configure it right, and it also allows that flexibility in the NGO sector. The tricky bit for some of the workers in this rapid scale of change is when things are really stressful, I want to control what I do and do it really well. So could you comment on that, the need for balance in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a desire to stick, or at least to try and confine work to that with which you're at least broadly familiar and that with which you're broadly comfortable. I think it's about managing the pace of challenge. I mean, this was the experience with the nurses. Nurses were either the very best and the very worst of learning environments on wards. It depended how the ward system, the ward management, got novice nurses to do new things in ways that they felt weren't too threatening and the ways in which they felt that they were reasonably in control. So you basically made the challenge gradient one that people could cope with. Basically, if people found themselves confronted by situations that were just too scary in terms of the consequences, like the patient dying, they did find this was early days in their training, they did tend to find this rather unsurprisingly stressful. So you had to try and get the challenge gradient to go up at a pace that the individual could cope with. Some wards were very good at managing this process, others just threw them in at the deep end and saw what happened. And I must admit, as a potential patient, I know which ward I would prefer to be a patient in. I think the other thing is that none of us, or at least I think most of us, if we were told that we could be given a blank sheet of paper and we could completely restructure our organisation, and particularly jobs and roles within it, and skill sets within it, to deliver the services that we currently have to deliver, that we anticipate we would deliver, I don't think many of us would recreate job structures that we've tended to inherit. We certainly wouldn't in universities. They're deeply, deeply dysfunctional. And we are, in the work organisation job design, we are prisoners of the Victorian past in a great deal of what we do. Job roles that might have made sense in 1950, design of work and workflows that might have made sense in 1950, no longer terribly appropriate for the kinds of client groups and the kinds of problems that we face now. And given that the workforce is so much more highly qualified, we really need to try and make use of that. I'm not for a minute saying it's easy, I think it's very difficult. But the gains would be tremendous in the sheer scale of the cost of health and social care in all its many forms in Queensland is so, and in the UK even more, is so vast that a 1% or a 2% or a 5% improvement in productivity we would be talking about billions of dollars over a period of years. Now that's actually something that I would have thought policymakers might want to fight. They can legs to this in a way that says that it makes sense. And certainly many providers might want to try and achieve those gains. So I think it's a lot to play for, which is in a sense why I thought it would be worth trying to share these experiences with you this afternoon. I don't have there's no leading answer yet. The Scottish projects are a work in progress, but I do think that certain pointers are beginning to emerge about how you could start to join up a whole raft of different activities and developmental activities in terms of helping and supporting organisations to change what they do and how they do it that could bring a lot of balance at once. And in a world where money is in short supply and time is short, that seems to me to be something that can go up.
Is there any final questions for you before we wrap up? Look, just really thank you very much for sharing those insights. It was great to be able to have a bit of a dialogue with you and share some ideas. Clearly we're talking about really different environments,
yes.
but looking at even implementing and learning the way that we can maybe chunk off some of those things and chew that around and review is a great benefit for us to think about. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much.